now. So I want to hear a comparison between, you just graduated in May. We're recording this in December, so you've been 6 months-ish on the road. What are the differences you're seeing between being in the incubator of college itself as a participant, and then stepping outside that realm and yet entering back into it as an outsider? What are you seeing here?
What I've seen for my personal self, coming from a chapter and a chapter that I was a leader in, and then graduating, I've seen my priorities change. The things that I thought were important in college, I have since shifted my focus, and that's because I've also been able to actually go out and experience different people doing different things and seeing that and getting out of the bubble of college. And what I've been trying to do, especially in mentoring some of these chapter leaders, is working with them specifically on how can they enhance their role, how can they enhance their chapter, but also how can they enhance their lives and get the most out of this experience.
Where you participated in college in a lot of different things. I've known you for a few years now, and you rose to some pretty significant leadership positions. What's the temptation to try to bring people into your own experience? Because I know that we can kind of sniff out leaders and try to pull them in directions maybe they're not ready to go, or maybe they don't want to go. How are you handling that?
That's been a challenge for me. The big part of what we talk about when training for this job is to not talk about your experiences and not talk about your chapter experiences too much. There's obviously a degree where you can relate, you can share analogies, share stories, but what I've learned in specifically trying to mentor is that talking about my experiences aren't always as applicable to the people that I'm mentoring, because everyone knows themselves, and it's hard for them to get out of their sphere and think of how you made those decisions and how you took on those experiences if they haven't experienced it for themselves.
We do something similar in counseling where we try to steer away from experiential comparisons, like, we both went to a ball game, but we could walk away with a completely different understanding of it, and steer more toward emotional, right? So, and the reason for that is that nobody can ever have the same experience. So you can say, oh yeah, I was president of my chapter, you're president of your chapter, here's what I would do. But the dynamics are so different and the personalities are so different, you could end up losing the person altogether in that conversation. The eyes glaze over and they go, shut up, old man. Old, I'm only a year older than you. But you carry that weight. So how do you work through that? Because I'm thinking now in terms of somebody listening to this wondering, yes, how do you do that? How do you avoid talking about your own stuff in comparison? What are some tips and techniques?
Well, I haven't been 100% successful at this, and this is something that I'm still learning, because the default, I think, for a lot of people, myself included, is to talk about my experiences.
When I was your age.
Yeah, right, because that's what I've experienced, and that's what I know off the top of my head, easiest go-to. But for me, I've been trying to be more intentional about putting myself in their head and thinking, what is it that... In a lot of these situations, I have an idea of where I'd like them to end up at the end of the conversation. I have an idea of what I'd like them to do at the end of the conversation. And I'm thinking in my head, what is the best way to get you to see what I'm seeing? And a lot of the times, the first thing I think about is, oh, well, I could share my experience, but I know that that's not the best thing for them to see. So trying to be more intentional and thinking about what is the best way for them to understand what I'm seeing. And usually the first thing in my mind is not to go to my experiences.
This sounds a lot like yield theory. Have you read Conti's newest book, Walking Through Anger?
I have not.
You should. Oh, for the listening audience, if you haven't read Walking Through Anger by Christian Conti, it's less about actual anger and dealing with it. I mean, it does, but it's more about understanding how you and others tick around you and meeting people where they are. So it's very, very yield theory-esque for somebody who hasn't studied it a whole lot, because I know you've brushed up against it. But that's really, really good. And I think the important point is to steer away from self and toward the other person, right? To try to crawl into their head and try to imagine things with whatever information you know about the person. Imagine life through their eyes. And it takes the metaphor of walking a mile in a person's shoes a little bit further and actually being the other person, so that you can empathize with them and speak in their way. And if you automatically know, with whatever information you have, that sharing your personal story is going to turn them off, you just don't go there. when you're doing this, what's the receptivity? Because I know when I was in school, like the regional director, or RD as we call him, would roll through, and it's like, oh, here comes the accountability guy, making sure we're not partying too hard, and the chapter house isn't being set on fire. You're approaching it differently. You're a little more evolved. You got a little more psychology under your belt than the most of the guys that I've experienced. What's been the reception, and what are the results?
There are times in the past where people in this role have taken a really professional characteristic, and that doesn't always vibe well with college students, and that can be an initial tick to them that you're not one of me. You don't understand where we're at, where we're coming from. So one thing that's been successful for me is just breaking down that professional wall and trying to just be one of the guys. And a lot of what we talk about during training is that relationships drive results, right? I have this end goal that I want to get to, but I have to have a relationship to help these people get there. And how do you do that? For me personally, for every, I'd say 3 meetings that I have that are professional, I try and have 1 meeting that's just hanging out, getting to know the guys, and creating that relationship on a one-on-one level. And this job also provides a lot of opportunity for me to be there for them when they need me. When things hit the fan, I'm the guy they call. So it already builds up that trust, and you have, as long as you can be relatable and you can understand and put yourself in their mindset, which should be easy to do given that I just graduated a year ago and went through similar things. It's made it okay for me. It hasn't been a struggle for me.
If we could shift the conversation a little bit, I want to talk about the tension between high performance in college, the stress of financial commitment, because college prices are skyrocketing, and the interest attached is obscene, and then the balance of trying to live a social life. I would appreciate sharing your perspective on that. We've talked, in the past about this, but what are you seeing in terms of like psychological distress and performance and that kind of thing?
Within the Greek system, what I know decently well, it's easy with the high-performing chapters that are doing everything right that I've worked with, and they care about member development. They care about creating the best opportunities for their members in and after college. Those chapters don't look at their organization as an outlet. They look at their organization as an opportunity. But where I see some of my lower-performing chapters, they have used the fraternity as an outlet. And it's not something that's in addition to them. So what I see there is that they are sometimes on more stressful campuses where the academic rigor is higher, or they're on state school campuses where they're working, they're commuting, and they're adding all these different obligations in their life. And relating that to my college experience, I can say that I was very fortunate that I didn't have to worry about a lot of those things, and I could focus on school. And because I had that extra time, I was able to take more on my plate in terms of my development and opportunities that I had to grow myself. But in doing that, I still have more on my plate, just like everybody is during college has a lot on their plate. And it's easy, the default, especially from what we've seen from movies like Animal House and that explain in American Pie, that explain what this college experience is supposed to be, is to have that default be drinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it still drinking, or are other drugs creeping in?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak to my 4 years of experience in this extra year that I have had working with college students, but I think there's definitely more drugs there than what I initially thought college was going to be. When you think about this rise of popularity in festivals too, people are very willing to spend their money and go to these festivals, and not for everybody, but for some people these are associated with drugs.
Yeah. Is it psychedelics, or are people doing more street drugs, the methamphetamines and heroin and that kind of thing, or is it just like designer stuff? Like where's the breakout here?
Yeah. I haven't seen street drugs like meth and heroin being an issue. I've seen a prevalence of coke in a lot of these college campuses. I've seen a prevalence of Adderall, but that's probably assumed.
Adderall really came on when I was just getting out in the early 2000s. It was to help people study and focus. And now what I'm hearing is it's far more it's almost common. Like there's just bottles of Adderall or whatever, pick your stimulant, prescribed psychotropic stimulant to help people focus for their studying. And I'm trying to figure out, and maybe there's multiple causations here, but is it because pressure's gotten so high for some reason, mom and dad are applying pressure because they're the ones footing the bill to a higher degree than we ever saw when I was there 20 years ago? Or is it, the instant gratification mentality where you just don't want to put in the real actual work effort and you'd rather just cram at the end of the week for the test? Or is it a combination of that plus social media plus social responsibilities and obligations that's eroding the work ethic and the study habits? Or is it just fun? I don't know, but it seems to be everywhere now. Like drinking was okay, somebody's drinking every night of the week back in the day, but it wasn't to excess. Now everybody's drinking to excess. Back in the day, you didn't have prescription drugs. Now everybody's got some sort of prescription drug. Back in the day, it was a lot of weed and alcohol. Now it's Coke. It's like everything's just kind of like on tilt now. At least that's my perception from what I'm hearing from college students, and I don't know if that perception's accurate because I only got one college to draw from.
Right. Yeah, I think all variables are at play here. I think whether it be from recreation to I didn't study all week and now I need to cram. I can't speak historically to how it's been, but I know that it's more common than I thought it was going to be coming into college. And yeah, and it's different with every single one of them too. I mean, because when the prevalence of Coke when I was in college was much more around like partying, having fun, and this is like a treat, as one would call it. But Adderall was much more like, yeah, I'm going to the library for 8 hours. I have a whatever milligram Adderall that I'm going to take.
And in my estimation, it's like that wasn't there at all. Now it is, and it's become a crutch. You've been around this for about 5 years now. Are you seeing an uptick, or is it held stable? Like, what's the usage overall?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I myself didn't really partake in it, so I wasn't around it on a consistent basis. It was just when I saw it, I saw it. Yeah.
What I'm trying to do here is wrap this back around to the suicide conversation earlier about what led to the elimination of the hazing system in Sigma Phi Epsilon and overall college stress, because I've read multiple reports that anxiety and depression are up in college. I don't know about deaths. I don't know about suicide. I know that suicide across the board in America is up across all demographics, particularly adolescents and seniors. But I don't know where that goes into the college crowd. And if this is just if the use of drugs and alcohol is a way to stabilize oneself, if that's the case, then that sucks because we're just adding more and more pressure to people. But I don't know, and I'm just trying to tie things together, and maybe the listening audience has something to, if you're hearing this, write in info@nogginotes.com. We'd love to hear from you. I want to get out of this little rut that we dove into that has apparently no solution. Talk to me about what's going on in the Greek system as a whole as it relates to involvement in campus. As I know that our own neighborhood campus here in Reno has gotten a lot of friction with the institution. The administration doesn't really apparently want student life around anymore or something. I should probably grab one of those administrators and have them on to talk about this because that's the appearance, at least to the public. What do you see in the other 14 or 16 chapters that you're working with that, insofar as like, is Greek life vibrant? Is it dying? Are people interested? Is there, there's all this tension of toxic masculinity and, how that plays out. So just speak freely about whatever strikes you, I guess.
Yeah. Speaking specifically to SIGEP or Sigma Phi Epsilon, we have seen it a best practice to partner with universities to the 100%. And what that does is our host institutions, being in a good partnership with our host institution, can only amplify our experience. Being at odds with one another just creates an environment and circumstances that aren't beneficial to our mutual goal, which is to develop students in college for a successful life after college. And kind of what's going on with the